Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all here. Lloyd, thank you for coming up from Wellington. It's nice to see you in Auckland. Well, it's a novel idea. It's good that you're here. With that, happy to take your questions.
I've got a few questions from our reporters around the country. First on oil and gas and fossil fuels. How much total is your budget giving to the fossil fuel industry?
Well, as you know, we've talked about a $200 million investment to make sure that we can get oil and gas exploration back here in New Zealand. It's a really important part of it. We're a country that's a top 5 in terms of renewable energy, but we're also going to need gas for a foreseeable period of time. And as you know, the oil and gas ban, as lovely as it may sound, it ended up creating a whole bunch of unintended consequences, which puts our energy security at risk. And so we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to generate domestic pools of gas. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're importing huge amounts of Indonesian coal. That's not where we want to be. Gas is half as bad as oil, not quite as good as renewables, but it's going to be necessary for New Zealand for some time.
We've got a few clauses in free trade agreements with the EU and with the UK, and I think it was last year that Minister Macleay signed the climate deal, which have a whole lot of provisions in there that talk about winding down fossil fuel investment and putting government money into fossil fuels. Does that, what you announced yesterday, does it breach any of those? No, we're very comfortable with meeting our obligations and meeting our commitments. And I just, in my conversations with many leaders around the world when I'm doing my bilaterals, is, we are a top 5 country in terms of the amount of renewables that we have. We're almost at 88%. That is, we want to obviously double the amount of renewables. That's why, we're doing everything we can to get fast track up and running, to get solar, to get wind out there as much as possible. But all we're just saying is, for a country like New Zealand with our energy mix, we're going to need gas in particular. We want to have gas rather than coal, and as a result we've got to make sure that we can incentivise domestic production of gas. Financial contribution, this is what subsidies to fossil fuels are classified as, a financial contribution from the government or an equity infusion or funding mechanism, which that kind of catches what you announced yesterday, that $200 million for gas exploration. Yeah, look, I just say... Does breach the climate deal, or is there an exemption clause? I just say to you, we are very comfortable with that we'll meet our international obligations, but we also have a high mix of renewables, but we do need gas for New Zealand for the foreseeable future, and that's all that we're doing. That's why we want to repeal the oil and gas ban. That's why we're making sure that we're doing everything we can to attract investment to New Zealand to actually explore for gas. We're going to need more of it. We're going to need it in our mix as we go forward from here. What exemption is it though that you're using?
Again, I'd just say talk to Shane Jones if you'd like to about that, given that's his area and his ministry. But I just say to you, we've been very open about it from day one. The oil and gas ban had unintended consequences which drove our wholesale prices up very high last year. As a result, people lose their jobs off the back of not having good energy security and good energy policy. This country, we have a high quotient of renewables. We're very proud of that. We're going to double that. We're going to continue to expand that, but we also need gas.
Prime Minister, looking at investment boost, are there safeguards in place to top it up if needed?
In what way, sorry? What do you mean?
An investment boost. There's a couple of big capital projects like commercial developments could take a large chunk out of what's available. I'm just wondering if there's safeguards in place to be able to top it back up. Yeah, look, I mean, we're comfortable with what we've estimated it to be and the impact that will be annually. But I'd just say it's really important. It's a part of the budget's gone down exceptionally well over the last 24 hours. I was with business owners this morning, people who were telling me stories of Chris, just yesterday we were talking about a $1.3 million investment in our small medium enterprise to mechanise some part of our processing, and as a result the cash flow wasn't quite right, and actually this tips it now over the line, and as a result we'll make that investment. That's exactly what we want to see. We know New Zealand needs more capital, we know our small businesses need more capital to be more productive, and I'm very comfortable with that policy. Will it have to be capped at some point, or will the eligibility have to be changed to keep up with that demand that you're just talking about?
No, we don't. The way we've done it is by actually saying it's 20% that you get to depreciate in that first year, and that's the cap that's in place.
And so do you have guarantees that the investment boost will actually lead to more jobs and higher wages, or is this just an example of trickle-down economics?
That's a pretty loaded question. What do you mean by that? How will you explain that?
We're talking about, as you said, you've already had this interest in here, but there's going to be a time in the foreseeable future where that's not going to meet the demand that you're talking about is going to be there. So,
I disagree completely with the characterisation of your question. The bottom line is any economy in the world, any of the 195 countries that exist, when they embrace more technology, more innovation, more automation, more capital, more plant, more equipment, that creates more capital into a system, and as a result that leads to higher wages, and that's exactly what we need to do in New Zealand given our low productivity rates.
And you're counting on that higher wages, the higher capital investment and the breaks that will eventually lead to. Do you think that's going to trickle down to other areas of the economy, low-income families? Is that going to provide greater economic wealth?
How we lift our collective living standards in New Zealand, despite the fact we're all working incredibly hard, is that we need to work smarter. And in order to do that and to access higher paying jobs, we need to actually have a bigger dose of technology, innovation, and certainly also capital.
Prime Minister, what do you make of Te Pāti Māori's leaders not being present at yesterday's debate?
That's up to Te Pāti Māori. I'm focused on growing the economy. That's what I'm here to do. That's a Beltway story. I'm here to make sure out there in New Zealand, people are actually able to get ahead if they work hard, and actually we create the conditions for them to do that.
Is it an insult to the public?
That's a question you have to ask them.
Netanyahu has accused France, Canada and the UK of inciting anti-Semitic violence by criticising the escalated military operation in Gaza. New Zealand has been a signatory to a similar joint statement earlier this week. What's your response to Netanyahu?
Well, I disagree. I mean, our Foreign Minister signed in with 23 other countries a statement to say that we expect humanitarian assistance to be free-flowing into Gaza. What we're seeing there is an utter tragedy. There is no need for military action. What we need the parties to do is Hamas needs to release hostages immediately. Israel needs to respect and ensure a humanitarian free flow of aid and support. And equally, the parties need to have an immediate ceasefire and get around the table and talk about a two-state solution.
And how do you justify pouring more taxpayer money into boot camps when your trial has delivered substandard results?
Oh, well, I'll just say to you, we are starting to lower crime in this country, and New Zealanders are feeling safer because actually you've seen a huge drop-off in ram raids, down 60%. You've seen a huge growth in police out on the beat, up 40%. And you're seeing crime come down. And it's not just in the stats and the numbers, but people tell you how they feel safer coming into Auckland CBD now as a result of that. So I'm proud of our efforts to actually lower crime and to restore law and order in New Zealand. Sorry?
Specifically on the boot camps?
Well, it's a component of making sure we've gone after gangs because of the serious violent crime that they're prosecuting. We're making sure that we're going after serious young offenders, and importantly, we're toughening up our sentencing laws.
Can I just get your reaction to Labor's Labor's policy around pay equity, whether they're going to reverse your reforms or not? Yesterday, Chris Hipkins wouldn't promise that he would reverse the reforms, and then today, Barbara Edmonds has said that she would.
Well, it's the point I was making in my speech in the Parliament yesterday that, we actually get two positions from the Labour Party. Chris Hipkins speaks out of both sides of his mouth. He was actually for reversing it. The next day he was actually said it's too hard, it's too difficult, too complicated. Barbara Edmonds is now saying that she would reverse it all and find the $12 billion somewhere else, and Chris Hipkins still saying he won't do it. So, it's very, very confusing. It's up to them. They obviously, as I say, constantly flip-flopping. What we're focused on is making sure we are committed to pay equity. We've put money aside to make sure that we can settle any future pay equity claims. The system had got unworkable, unaffordable, and was broken, and we've fixed it to putting it back to its core purpose, which is to deal with sex-based discrimination. It sits alongside equal pay, it sits alongside collective bargaining, but it's designed to deal with sex-based discrimination in our sectors, and I'm very proud of, I'm pleased that we are deeply committed to pay equity, but the Labour Party position's all over the place.
Yeah, even now, though, do you know what their position is?
I've got no idea. I have no idea what the Labour Party position is. I don't think they know what their position is.
How is that $12.8 billion saving, how is that calculated?
It's about $1.8 billion in capex, and it's about $11 billion in contingency that was set aside by Chris Hipkins, who should know the number, and given he was the minister in that government and would be well aware of that not that long ago.
They said that they don't know how it's calculated. So is that a bit of a trap for them going forward and potentially into the next election?
No, they are economically illiterate is the issue, and we have seen that, and that's why this country has gone through huge amounts of economic pain and suffering because of their economic mismanagement and vandalism. It's 18 months ago that Chris Hipkins was the Prime Minister. We could identify that was a contingency sitting in the accounts. How come he couldn't and didn't know what it was? More importantly, what is his position? And you'll hear a whole bunch of flim-flam and a whole bunch of flip-flopping.
About pay equity, Finance Minister Nicola Willis said at the time that it was about principles, not about cost savings. Do you stand by that, or is that quite misleading?
No, absolutely. The primary reason we made the changes was to make sure we have a much more workable, sustainable and robust system that brings pay equity back to what was originally intended in 2017 to deal with sex-based discrimination in key sectors. And there's been a lot of scaremongering that this is about equal pay. There are different issues. This is about pay equity, which is about sectors that have large proportions of women workforces and them not getting recognised for work of equivalent value. But over the period of the last government, also those claims became very, very broad, not specific, and as a result, we've gone back to make sure that it's focused on sex-based discrimination.
But it made up such a massive portion of the cuts that we saw in the budget. So what would the government have done if it weren't for the cost saving?
Well, we made a number of savings because, as I articulated in some of my questions today in the session we've just come from, last year we made $23 billion worth of savings, and therefore that could be reprioritised and directed into our frontline services. The same thing's happened here. There's been about $21 billion worth of savings. Yes, about half of it has come from pay equity, but the other half has also come from 115 other initiatives to actually generate those savings to redeploy to where we think we can get better results.
The priority for yourself and your government has been keeping Kiwi talent in New Zealand rather than going offshore. What in the budget do you think keeps New Zealanders here rather than seeking better opportunities in, say, Australia? Yeah, look, the fact is that our economy is going to grow 2.7% average over the next 4 years. The fact that we're going to create 240,000 new jobs in the next 4 years. The fact that we now have inflation back within the band, we have interest rates falling. And essentially the proposition to people to say in New Zealand is to say, if I work hard, I can get ahead because I've got a well-managed economy. I actually feel safe when I'm walking around the city because the law and order has been restored. And importantly, my kids are going to get a great education and set up for an awesome future, and my parents can get good healthcare when they need it. And so that's why I've been saying to you from the very beginning, we're rebuilding the economy, restoring law and order, delivering better public services. If we do that job, people will see an awesome future here, and there is a great future here in New Zealand.
Just back to oil and gas, did any fossil fuel companies donate money to the National Party?
Not that I'm aware of, and all of that is declared, Lloyd. So, as you know, we have a very clear and transparent donor policy across our party.
If New Zealand First got any donations?
You'd have to talk to them. But I just say to you again, we have really good mechanisms and processes to make sure all of that is as fully transparent.
And just my last question on this, Greenpeace is calling your budget the scorched earth budget because of the fossil fuel subsidies. What do you make of that?
No, this is let's be clear what happened in the last administration. They went off and announced an oil and gas ban and didn't think through the second and third order consequences. And the consequences was last year we had wholesale electricity prices that were out of control. And if you happen to run a mill, all of a sudden you're faced with a choice of laying off workers. And so because of an ill thought through policy, we ended up with some consequences which are people lost their jobs. Low and middle income working New Zealanders lost their jobs because of that. We're just saying to you very simply, we have a high proportion of renewables. We want to double that amount of renewables. We're doing everything like fast track. If the Labour Greens crowd really cared about the environment, they would have supported fast track, but they didn't because they don't fundamentally care about it. And so we are doing that because we want more solar built, we want more wind built, we want a lot more renewable energy in this country. But we're just saying to you as a base load, we are going to recognise that we need gas because the consequence all Labour and the Greens did is they moved New Zealand out of gas and into coal, and they made our emissions worse because of that decision.
You've talked a lot about the cost side. What about the revenue side of the government's books? Are you exploring anything around driving up government revenues somehow, either increased taxation or other measures?
Well, that sounds like a Labour Party policy, doesn't it? Which is spend more, a lot of it on wasteful spending, borrow more and tax more. And what this country doesn't need right now is a capital gains tax going right through it. Again, what's the Labour Party position on that? We've heard zero policies, zero plan. And we don't think that's the right way forward. We think the right way forward is to incentivise growth and as a result drive a bigger economy.
But realistically, how can you actually, even your current surplus target with all the cost cutting that you've done, even your current surplus target is so small, it's almost a rounding error. How can you realistically look at sustainable government books into the future if you're not talking?
New Zealand has a growth problem, not a tax problem. We have a growth problem, and we have had a recession in this country because of the decisions to spend more, borrow more and tax more. When our debt has gone from $60 billion to $180 billion, thank you Chris Hipkins and Labour, and now our interest bill is $9 billion, which is more than we spend on police, corrections, customs and our justice system combined. That is our problem. Our challenge is about growth, and that's why you've heard us just say it's about growth, growth, growth. That's what we've been doing since day one. That's what we've been doing all year. And that's where the real opportunity sits for New Zealand. A capital gains tax just ends up punishing small businesses, and it's not the right answer.
Deputy Prime Minister has expressed, Winston Peters has expressed interest in supporting Pacific nations when it comes to climate aid, especially with the US withdrawing with US aid. Can you please just explain why this is being cut in the budget?
Well, again, we're actually expanding our aid and our support in foreign affairs. We've got a big job to do. And actually, we do spend a lot of time building out and supporting aid infrastructure in the Pacific. And usually it is around moving to more renewable energy. It's often about making sure they're dealing with sea rise and what other infrastructure investments that we can make. So a lot of our investment, if you think about our total aid budget, which has climate components and non, but a lot of it is actually, frankly, all going into core infrastructure to actually make sure these countries can be more environmentally resilient, but more importantly, have the infrastructure they need to build out their economies as well.
Last question spoke of the difference between the public and private sectors.
Sorry?
In the session there, you
Yes.
spoke about the difference between public and private sectors. And
With respect to technology?
Yeah,
Yep.
pay equity cuts, you mentioned as part of a retraining exercise. Can you clarify what that means?
Sorry, I didn't say that.
You did say that there's a retraining exercise underway as far as how money is spent.
Yes, not pay equity though. Pay equity is what we've committed to under our legislation from last week. What we're doing is, what I was alluding to there was about the use of technology, actually being in government and actually using that to digitise government. There's a lot of work for us to be able to do to be able to get the value out of making government much more responsive, more service oriented towards its public. And the second piece I've talked about is that rather than the layer cake of new money coming in on top of money that's been submitted to in the previous year's budgets, is that we're also training the public service to think about the total spend that they have, all of the money and resources they have, and ask the question, are you getting maximum value and maximum outcomes from that spend? And that's how we generate the reprioritisations. As I said, 23 billion last year, 21 billion this year, and that enables us then to go off and make a record investment in healthcare and in education. And you think about it, we've added 7% increase in healthcare expenditure in this budget, 6% on a per capita basis. So we're able to put more money into a system like healthcare because of the fact that we are reprioritising and doing smarter things with that money.
Can I just clarify something that you said in the intimate fireside?
I thought you'd enjoy that, Lloyd.
You said that
Just there's no fire.
technology, you're going to reverse engineer some restructures of the public sector with technology and hope to remove a third of the bureaucracy.
No, that's not what I said. What I meant was, and what I did say was, and is understood by that audience, is there's a real opportunity to digitise our government. If you think about it, people, whenever they want to access a benefit or whenever they need to make an entitlement or a claim, they're constantly providing lots of information over and over again. And all we're saying is, look, we think there's a way using technology that naturally those organisations will simplify in order to focus on their customer about what is delivered. You should be able to, as a 32-year-old woman, as I said, with 2 kids, be able to type in, this is my income, what are my entitlements around working for families or getting support for learning support or any other entitlements that you may be entitled to. That's how it's working in the commercial world out there, in the private sector, globally and here in New Zealand increasingly. And we would love to think that we could get government up to the standard of what you see using technology in a way that actually gives better service to the public of New Zealand.
And I understand that, but are you getting rid of a third of the public service?
No.
Are you talking about a third?
No, I was just saying you can lose a lot of money in bureaucracy and people waste a lot of time trying to deal with the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education when actually technology solutions today would enable you to say, as I said, a natural language query like that actually could tell you exactly what your entitlements would be pretty cool and be pretty powerful.
Job losses would inevitably...
Not necessarily. You think about how many businesses today are using people in different ways, working alongside technology. So, but you don't also run an inefficient system just to keep a bureaucracy in place and keep doing the way we've been working since 1975 in 2025. You should be embracing technology in order to offer better service to the public of New Zealand. That's what that was about.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, cool. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. Take
Everybody, it's somewhat telling that the day after the government's budget they're still spending most of their time talking about the Labour opposition rather than what they have just done for and to New Zealand. Ultimately, if they were that proud of their budget, they wouldn't spend all their time talking about us, they'd be talking about the things that they're proud of. They're clearly not very proud of it. They're trying to whip up a frenzy around pay equity, having said to New Zealanders for the last 2 weeks that this wasn't about saving money for the budget. It seems to be that the money they've saved in the budget by cutting women's pay is the only thing that they can talk about around pay equity at the moment. So I think if anyone is struggling to get their story straight when it comes to women's pay, it's this government. So happy to open up and take questions.
What is Labour's position on whether you return that $13 billion to the pay equity fund?
The position that both Barbara and I have set out is very, very clear. Labour will reverse the government's changes to pay equity. We'll set out how much that will cost and how that will pay for it, how we will pay for that in our fiscal plan that we'll set out before the election. We're not in a position to do that at the moment because we haven't seen the breakdown of where that figure actually comes from.
That isn't exactly what Barbara said on RNZ this morning. She was given that figure of $12.8 billion, asked where she was going to find it, and Barbara said, we're going to find it. So that suggests to say you were going to return that money.
Look, I've seen the transcript, I think we said the same thing, but I'll let Barbara speak for herself.
The Labour Party believes that you should pay women what they're worth. So we're going to go and work through the budget. We're going to work through next year's budget. We're going to look through the budget release papers that come through. We're going to figure out how they got to that $12 billion. We still don't know where the other contingencies are in relation to this because the Minister of Finance has not exposed that. So we're committed to pay equity and we will find the money where we need to put the appropriate contingencies aside for pay equity.
The Greens have come out and said very clearly that they would be all of that $13 billion would go straight back into pay equity. Why can't you do the same?
The Greens' position is a matter for them. But what we also recognise is that a lot can change in 18 months. Bearing in mind some of the workforces that are, up for in line for pay equity or were in line for pay equity and had their pay equity claims cancelled are also going to be in collective bargaining this year. So the amount required could change. We have been very clear. We'll reverse the changes that the government made and we will calculate what that's worth. And we will make sure that we've set aside funding to pay for that. It's we're saying the same thing today as we said yesterday. We can't put a number on that. The government haven't actually released how they arrived at the number that they have put out there.
You've been saying for weeks now that the government is cutting women's pay. If you don't use every single cent of that $13 billion, if you don't commit to putting that back in, that's essentially what you'd be doing. You'd be cutting women's pay.
Absolutely not. Totally disagree with you. Because we don't know what the figure will be 18 months from now.
Well, it's not
Wasn't that just the projected pay equity claims?
Sorry?
$13 billion, wasn't that just projected?
Yeah, but we don't know how that's broken down. For example, there'll be issues around timing and sequencing. There'll be issues around collective bargaining that will take place between now and the next election that will also need to be factored in. So if you take teachers, for example, my pick is that a lot of the teachers, having had their pay equity claims cancelled, will now go into bargaining this year asking for more money because they'll basically say, well, pay equity's been taken off the table for us, so now we're going to want a bigger pay rise through regular bargaining. We don't know how that's all going to play out.
So it essentially could be more than $13 billion.
No, in the case of teachers, if they get a bigger settlement through their regular bargaining this year, it'll be less.
Well, what's really key is that the budget proactive release probably in about 2 months' time. We're going to be looking through those papers to see how they've actually broken it down. If you notice the actual amount that's put aside for the operational costs, there was about $1 billion, which was the capital cost. We need to understand what those capital costs are. So that's why we're saying we have to work through it carefully and then figure out what the contingency is that we need to set aside.
Well, have you got a cap here? No matter what decision you come to here, we're talking billions of dollars. Where are you going to find that money during government?
Our cap is that women should be paid
No, I get that, but
properly.
have you got a numerical cap on the amount of money that you put back into the system?
We will make sure that women are paid properly. We won't be cutting women's pay to balance the budget.
Is that unlimited pot of cash at the end of the day?
We'll be making sure that women are paid properly.
No, can we just get an actual...
We're not going to, unlike this government, we're not going to balance the government's budget by settling for paying women less than what they're worth.
I think you do owe the people in this country a detailed answer to that question.
And they will have one before the election.
But why can't you give it to us now? I mean, you had one...
You're asking us to give information out that the government hasn't provided to us.
I'm asking you to at least put a signpost in the road that says, this is the cap.
The signpost in the road is that we will make sure women get the pay equity that they've been promised.
What is the numerical figure in terms of the cap?
Well, we can't calculate that at the moment.
Yesterday you said you were unable to say how much that projection was when you left office. Have you gone back and had a look at those papers yet?
No, I haven't.
You were the minister.
But I mean, those papers are over 2 years old. If you want to know what informs the government's budget, ask the government.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand how much it inflated between 2020 and when you left office and between...
Well, you could ask the government that.
Just government there.
If you reverse the changes, though, don't you risk putting women back again? Maybe start off these negotiations?
And that is actually something that we also need to be very clear of as well. We are not going to make changes in a way that cancels all of the pay equity claims that women will subsequently lodge following the government's claim. So we've got to work our way through what that looks like. That's detail that we still have to do. But we are not going to do what this government does, which is continually reset the clock.
Well, you're not giving us a number here, but could you
You're quite right.
Yes, could you at least...
You can keep asking, and I'm still not going... You're going to get exactly the same answer.
For a while. Could you at least give us some sort of indication as to how you would balance the books here? I mean, there's three levers you can pull. There is taxation, there is debt, and there is...
there are choices,
Yeah.
and every government has choices, and Barb, you can comment on those.
Yeah, again, there's also the element of doing exactly what this government has done. So they've given $2.9 billion for landlords, they've given $260 million for tobacco companies. Yesterday they gave $200 million for gas subsidies, and they've also cut other areas. So these are all the choices that governments have to make, every political party will have to make, and as we get closer to the election, we've got another budget to go, we will release our fiscal plan.
If you reverse all of those things you just mentioned, you're getting nowhere close to...
And again, we're going to go through this year's budget, we're going to go through next year's budget line by line, we're going to find those areas. It comes down to choices, and we believe that women are worth it.
So that's your commitment, is that this is going to be reprioritization rather than new revenue streams or new areas of debt?
Just like every political party, it'll come down to choices, and then we will release that as part of our fiscal plan.
Investment.
Can I just go back a step as well and say the fact that the government is spending all of their time at the moment talking about the Labour Party means that what they've been telling New Zealanders for the last 2 weeks simply isn't true. They cut pay equity, they cut women's claims for pay equity, extinguishing 33 active claims, some of which were very close to settlement, so they could balance their budget. It's that simple.
Investment boost is totally uncapped. Does Labour support investment boost? Do you think it should have a cap?
So there are really good elements within investment boost, particularly the capitalisation of expenses, or in some ways some people would say accelerated depreciation. There are probably some fiscal concerns around that. So obviously with new commercial buildings, that's a pretty big amount. So the question I would be asking the government, and I'll be wanting to check with them, is how did you get to that forecast? Because allowing for accelerated depreciation for a commercial building, for example, commercial buildings can be like between $2–5 million, who knows, but that's a really big capital expense at 20%.
Is it a tax cut for oil rigs, coal mines, and skyscrapers?
Well, if they meet the rules, then potentially yes.
And would you support those types of things being included in the scheme in the future, or should there be a cap on the value of the asset?
Again, comes down to choices. We're going to have a good look at the way the legislation has been set. We'll wait for those budget policy documents to come through to see how they forecasted that amount that they put into the budget, and we'll make decisions based on the values that we believe New Zealanders want.
Is there a risk of a budget blowout, though, if the government got their numbers wrong there?
There is very much potentially a potential for a government blowout, particularly because of the commercial building side.
It was also pitched as, employers would be able to hire more employees, drive down wages, but I mean, there could be a long lag on this. Is this just sort of trickle-down economics?
Yeah, some people would describe it as trickle-down economics. Ultimately, companies and businesses do want cash flow. This does release some cash flow. However, you've got to have the money to invest. Some companies are not in that position to do so. Other companies are in a much better position than they were going to do it anyway.
So should it have been means tested?
Means tested?
Or, in a company-wide sense?
I'd have to get back to you on that one. I think that's actually really difficult to be able to do because tax is based on self-assessment. So as people go through their tax return every year and they return, whether it's a straight line or whether it's diminished value for depreciation, that's things that a company would have to decide for themselves. So I don't think you could means test it. It would be quite difficult to do that on a self-assessment basis.
Is it corporate welfare investment boost?
Obviously, when you're saying to someone that we're going to give you a 20% straight up capital expense when you buy a piece of item, you could describe it as corporate welfare or subsidies. I'd be quite surprised I'd be quite interested to see what David Seymour says about that. But there are different ways that the tax system does allow for depreciation, so that in the end you set aside the amount that you need to replace that over its estimated useful life.
Mr. Hipkins, can you talk about what we could expect to hear from you tomorrow?
I'll be giving a similar address to the one that I gave last weekend to the Auckland Regional Conference to the Labour Party members, obviously updated with a few reflections on this year's budget. So we're still working our way through the budget. There might be some new things that we find overnight, as we continue to work our way through the budget, but it will certainly be picking up the themes in my budget speech yesterday as well. So no new announcements for us, just to be clear, in the speech I'm giving to the Labour Party tomorrow.
What do you make of the government pumping $33 million over the next few years into groups?
Well, this is a government that's cutting funding for babies and putting it into boot camps. I think social investment didn't last very long, did it? If they want to spend money in order to avoid kids getting into trouble, taking it away from babies to put into boot camps isn't a very good way of doing that.
And how would you describe the pilot that we've seen so far? How would you sum that up to New Zealanders?
The boot camp pilot has been an unmitigated disaster. All the advice the government got before they set it up was that it wasn't going to work. It hasn't worked, and now they're doubling down on failure. KiwiSaver? Anyone? Got anything else?
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you. Ultimately, if you're an 18-year-old, starting out now in your working life, the government's taken $66,000 away out of your retirement nest egg. They're trying to say, oh, well, don't worry about that. You can just save more of your own money. But the reality here is the government has removed a contribution from the next generation of New Zealanders that was going to help them save for their retirement. At the same time, they're saying, oh, and we're going to make it harder for you to retire in the future. I actually think New Zealanders deserve better than that.
There's 66,000 people. What does that consist of? How do you get to it?
So it's based on the government contribution compounding over the lifetime of someone's contribution. So it's only the government contribution compounding.
Officials couldn't model exactly how many people might choose to opt to stay in that 3% rate because you can't predict human behaviour. Would you expect that employers don't try and coerce their employees to stay?
There's a couple of points. First of all, that's irrelevant to the issue of the government cutting the government contribution, because whether you're increasing your personal contribution or not, the government's taking away their contribution to your KiwiSaver, which means if you're an 18-year-old, you're losing that $66,000, regardless of whether you choose to compensate for that by increasing your own personal rate of savings. That's the government taking money out of your retirement savings. When Michael Cullen set up KiwiSaver, there were actually restrictions that stopped employers from treating your KiwiSaver as part of your overall salary package. The previous national government relaxed that, which means that it can now be treated as part of your overall salary package, which means that effectively you're taking a pay cut to increase your KiwiSaver. When it was first set up, that wasn't the way it was set up.
Can I just ask, and I'm coming back to this again, it's not oriented this morning, Bob, you were asked, how would you find this nearly $13 billion? And you said, we're going to have to find it. You go on to say, we are committed to finding that. And what you've just said now is completely different to that, because you're now not committing to finding that $13 billion.
No, we're committed to finding the appropriate contingency that we need to do to ensure that women are paid what they're worth.
Okay, but you said this morning, you were specifically asked about $13 billion, and you said, we're going to have to find it, so we're committed to finding that.
Yeah, and if you have a look at the first question before that,
I don't understand them correctly.
the first question before that was asking about, what would be the bigger package around that? So, where would we find the money? Are you committed to it? And I said, we're committed to pay equity. So you will find the money to ensure that women are paid what they're worth.
So not $13 billion?
Well, we need to work through that, because that's the government's numbers. We don't know if that 13... Sorry.
The fact that the National Party are now trying to ask us to write a fiscal plan 18 months out from the election, when they've still got a whole nother budget to go, and they haven't released all the information about this budget, shows how desperate they're becoming. The reality is they should be selling their own budget, answering questions on their own budget, not crystal ball gazing 18 months into the future. Good to know that they're already conceding the next election, though.
The Greens have been able to do a budget.
Look, if you've got questions on the Greens' alternative budget, ask the Greens.
Let me ask you about the moves on things like Nelson Hospital redevelopment there, emergency department work, Parliament, Wellington. You happy with that?
The total contribution to capital in the budget was only $1 billion this year, far less than what is needed for all the works around the country. The number of new beds in Nelson Hospital has halved from what Labor has proposed. That hospital was struggling, and I think the people of Nelson will be disappointed by what the government's done.
There's also, you said when you look through the budget, depending how much you're spending on these projects, what do you think there?
We know the net amount is only $1 billion, which is much less, and it's less than Labor committed over a similar period when we were in government.
So you don't think it's going to be anything else?
They are getting half the hospital that they would have got under Labor.
Didn't the rescoping happen under Labor?
No, that's not correct. Labor had a plan for 255 beds in a new hospital as a single building. But this government has changed that to a smaller building plus refurbishment of the old hospital. All of that downscaling has happened under this government.
Where would $6.6 billion be put to better use? Tax cuts for commercial property developers and fast-tracked coal mines and power plants towards the health system?
There is desperate need for funding of our health system. The problem with the health budget is that it is all eaten up by Health New Zealand's deficit. The government increased health funding by $1.3 billion. Health New Zealand is carrying a $1.1 billion deficit. That means New Zealanders will have to wait longer for care and will have less access to care than they usually expect.
The National Party talked up a very big game on capital spending, infrastructure spending before the last election. Their actions don't match up with their words, either then or now. They keep going on about the extra roads they want to build, the extra capital they want to do, how they're going to get the country's infrastructure sorted. Look at the budget, it tells you the different story. They're actually reducing the amount of money that government's investing in capital, and that includes hospitals, schools, roads, and other forms of capital. So despite all their big talk, despite their big international investment summit where they said, look at us, we've got this huge pipeline of work coming, they're not actually funding it. Cool. Thanks.
Thanks, Dean.
Thank you.